I'd like to welcome everybody here this morning, especially our visitors. I will start with three hopefully quick disclaimers. First disclaimer is the subject I am going to be talking about this morning is a choice that many people face in their lives. It is one that is very political, but we're not going to be approaching it from a political standpoint. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you to vote Republican, Democrat, Independent, any of those things. Those of you who know me pretty well know which way I vote, so I don't have to tell you which way I vote. The other thing is this is a very emotional, very sensitive subject. It's an emotional choice that many people do face in their lives. I'm not going to be approaching this from a fire and brimstone standpoint either. Really, I'm going to be approaching this from a standpoint of how do we, as brothers and sisters in Christ, help somebody, support somebody who might be facing this decision. It's not about judging them or condemning them. It's about being there for people who are in this situation. And the third disclaimer is I'm not going to provide you a perfect cookie-cutter answer for people who are in this situation, because people are facing this decision that we're going to be talking about for many different reasons. There's many different factors that go into it, but I want to talk about some scriptural principles that we can apply when trying to help people in these situations. All right, so there are many cultural and social issues that can cause very serious situations that congregations, individuals, and therefore congregations face today. Some of these social and cultural issues are issues like homosexuality, transgenderism, and abortion, just to name a few. There's many out there. And we're going to talk about one of these this morning. But I feel that too often, one of two approaches is taken by many congregations about these issues for different reasons. So I guess it's one approach for different reasons. And I don't feel we talk about these situations enough. They're uncomfortable. People don't like talking about uncomfortable situations. Some congregations don't talk about these tough social issues because they haven't been affected by them yet. I call this the Eric Holcomb approach. So just cat out of the bag. I do vote conservative, Republican for most of the time. And Eric Holcomb is our Republican governor of Indiana. But Eric Holcomb, I believe, said one of the dumbest things I have ever heard when faced with one of these issues when he had the opportunity to address one of these issues. It was the issue of a law that would prevent boys from competing against girls in girls' sports. Again, I'm not going to make this political, but his response and why he vetoed this bill was, well, that's a problem that we don't have in Indiana yet. And to me, that's dumb. Address the problem before it becomes a problem. That's like saying, well, we haven't had a murder in this town, so let's not really talk about murder. Let's not have a law against murder. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And it doesn't make a lot of sense that we would avoid talking about issues just because we haven't faced them yet. The other approach that some congregations take and why they don't talk about some of these tough social issues is because they think we're Rivendell. Michael will get this reference. So let me explain. In Lord of the Rings, there is a scene where the people who are trying to get the ring destroyed are facing like these dead kings, all right? They're in a big battle. And Frodo, or whatever his name is, he gets hurt, all right, by a dead demon king's sword, right? So regular medicine's not going to help Frodo. They have to get him to Rivendell, where the elves are, because the elves are the only one that can heal Rivendell. So they put Frodo on a horse with an elf, and they race off to try to get to Rivendell, to save Frodo. And so these dead kings, rather than getting on their dead dragons that can fly really fast, decide to get on dead horses and chase the Frodo and the elf, I don't remember her name, instead. I guess it makes for a better chase scene. So as they're riding, the elf is trying to comfort Frodo, saying, hey, as soon as we get to Rivendell, it's okay, because we're safe in Rivendell. And sure enough, as soon as they cross that river at the border of Rivendell, dead kings stop. They can't cross that because Rivendell is magical, and those dead kings can't get through there. And I think sometimes that we think maybe that the church is magical in the sense that these issues just aren't going to affect us. And we're dead wrong if we believe that. So I guess the first purpose of this lesson is to encourage those of us who do have opportunities to teach and to preach. Ryan does about half the preaching, I guess. So I'm not going to put all this on Ryan. But we men who have these opportunities to preach, let's talk about the things that aren't comfortable, but we need to address before they become problems. All right. Paul, if you go to Acts chapter 20. Paul in Acts chapter 20. Verse 31. It says, "Therefore watch and remember that by the space of 3 years I ceased not to warn everyone night and day with tears." This is about men arising, teaching perverse things. He didn't wait until the perverse things were taught. He warned them for 3 years about these things that could come. Now, we don't have a crystal ball, but we do know that the issues I mentioned earlier are issues that America faces on a daily basis, and they're becoming more and more prevalent. So, not a good idea to wait. But these are uncomfortable subjects. This morning, I want to talk about the uncomfortable subject of someone who might be considering an abortion. And again, I don't want to approach it from a question of, is abortion wrong? I don't want to approach it from a political standpoint. I want to ask ourselves, I want us to ask ourselves the question, how do we help an individual who is faced with the decision of whether or not I should have an abortion? All right, that's how I want to approach this. I want to approach it in a very loving way. First, I think we need to get some assumptions aside that we might have about who gets or thinks about getting an abortion and why abortions are often considered. First of all, who gets abortions? Well, obviously women are those who get abortions, but what's the demographic of the women who get abortions? I think if you just ask somebody on the street, say, hey, who's more likely to have an abortion? I think overwhelmingly the answer is going to be, well, it's unmarried teenage girls who aren't ready to have a baby yet. I think that's going to be the overwhelming assumption. But that would be a very wrong assumption. I looked these statistics up. I found these statistics in multiple places. They're the same numbers. I will tell you they don't add up to 100% if you're one of those math people and you add my numbers up. They're rounded a little bit, so they don't add up to exactly 100%. 57% of women who get abortions are in their 20s. 57%. This is not a teenage girl issue. I mean, it is, but that's not the overwhelming demographic who gets abortions. Okay, well, what's the second place? 31% of women who get abortions are in their 30s, still not in their teens, right? 9% of women who get abortions are in their teens, okay? So I just want to get some of these ideas out of her head, like maybe you're a father and you say, oh, I got my daughter through her teenage years and she didn't have an abortion, I've made it. No, that's not necessarily true. The other 4%, roughly, of women who get abortions are in their 40s. I think that was one of the numbers that really surprised me quite a bit. I think the usual assumptions, again, we have to throw out the window because if we let down our guard and think that just because they've gotten out of their teens, everything is okay, that everything is going to be okay. Let's look at reasons why abortions are performed according to the women who have had abortions. Again, we don't want to make assumptions, but people actually do polls on these things. They ask questions, and we're going to assume that the women who gave these answers are giving honest answers. And again, these numbers will not add up anywhere close to 100% because a woman who has asked these questions could give multiple reasons, okay? 74% of women who had an abortion stated they had the abortion because having a baby would dramatically change my life. Let me stop here. No kidding. No kidding. I'm not trying to be insensitive to what they're facing. A child changes everybody's life, whether it was planned or unplanned. It will change your life. 73% of women who had abortions stated that they had an abortion because they cannot afford a baby right now. Okay. So, if that is true, that gives us some hope as those who might want to help and support that woman who is considering that decision. Because that's kind of a cut and dry help, right? Not everything is going to be cut and dry as far as how we help these people. But if that's the only reason, wow, we can help with that. 48% of women, and this will be a tough one, 48% of women who had an abortion stated they don't want to be a single mom or they're having relationship problems. Perhaps they know that the father is just not going to be present in the life. All right, so that's a tougher issue. And I think the thing that we need to realize if we have somebody who is facing this question of abortion is the answer is not always going to be easy. And we need to be prepared as people who love those people to help them in the best way possible. 38% of women who had abortions, here's the one that disappoints me, say they had an abortion because they have completed their childbearing. Then why didn't you do something about it? All right, we live in a day and age where that is not the hardest thing in the world to avoid, and obviously these people know how the process works because they have already had children. I know of people who have, had that one extra child or two, never considered abortion at all. All right, so to me that it seems to me to be a bit of a selfish reason to have an abortion, and I'm trying not to be too judgmental. All right, so 1% of women who have abortions because the pregnancy is the result of rape. All right, so again, I don't want to get political here, but very often in what we hear about in the news in the abortion debate is people talk about rape and incest. That is a very small percentage of the reason that women have abortions. It's still a real reason. It's still a situation that we might know someone who faces that situation. But that is a very small percentage. And 0.5% of women who had an abortion stated they had an abortion because the pregnancy was the result of incest. Now, I apologize if I've used some words that some of you parents with younger children have to go home and explain this morning. Good luck with that, but I'm going to move on. So, how do we help, support, and comfort someone who is facing this decision? First, here is what we should not do. We should not just say, hey, abortion is wrong, don't get an abortion, and then move on. That's not helping. We need to address their concerns, those various concerns that people might have. The other thing we don't want to tell a woman who is facing the decision of an abortion or who had an unplanned pregnancy is, well, your life is ruined. Now, I'm not that old. I don't think I'm that old anyway. I was in high school about 32 years ago is when I graduated from high school. And back when I was in high school, when we found out about a young woman from the high school who got pregnant, dropped out of school, the overwhelming thought was, wow, her life is ruined. All right, that is definitely the wrong approach to take. We can't present it as a situation where there is no hope, because there is hope for people who are faced with this situation. Having a child will always change your life, but a child does not ruin a person's life. Can it make things difficult when it's unplanned? Absolutely, but difficulties can be overcome. And we need to be the kind of people that they know will be there for them to help them overcome those difficulties. The other thing that we can do to help a person who is facing an unplanned pregnancy, if the pregnancy is the result of sinful action, is to move past the sin and focus on the child. What do I mean by that? So somebody, and let's just use the young teenage girls in this situation because this is where that is mostly going to come into play. Young teenage girl gets pregnant. She knows she did wrong. She repents of that sin. Okay, what do we do from here on out? I actually knew a preacher many years ago who's now passed away, who I respected in a lot of ways. But much like Eric Holcomb said something that I thought was kind of ridiculous at one point. There was I don't remember who it was, but a young lady who had gotten pregnant, not married, acknowledged her sin, and then some of the other women in the congregation had a baby shower for that young lady. The preacher said we shouldn't have done that. The baby was conceived out of wedlock, so we shouldn't have baby showers for women who are in that situation. So should we not celebrate their birthdays either? Should we just treat this child like they are nothing but the result of a sinful situation. No, we have to be able to move past that sin that might have been committed in that situation. Those young women are going to feel probably bad enough as it is. So if they have acknowledged that sin and know that they need to make some changes, we need to be able to move past that and not try to make them continue to feel guilty. So let's move on to some scriptural applications, because I think that's the most important. I could sit up here and tell you my ideas all the time. I don't know much. So let's move to the scriptures. First of all, there's no need, and I touched on this a little bit, there's no need to shame or embarrass the individual. They likely already feel enough shame. A great example of the right attitude in this situation is found in Matthew chapter 1. Let's go to Matthew chapter 1 and start in verse 18. Matthew chapter 1, verse 18. Now the birth of Jesus Christ was on this wise. When his mother Mary was espoused or engaged to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Ghost. Then Joseph, her husband, being a just man and not willing to make her a public example, was minded to put her away privily or secretly. Joseph thought Mary had cheated on him. That's what he believed. If anybody has a right to be angry, and this is the thing, fathers, if your daughter becomes pregnant, what's the first response? We're angry, right? And first thing we want to do is probably find the person who did this to our daughter, quote, and deal with them, because we're angry, we're mad. We feel like we've been betrayed. Joseph felt like he was betrayed. If anybody had a right to shame somebody or embarrass somebody, it was Joseph, because he, in his heart, believed that Mary, at that time, that Mary had cheated on him. But it says here he was a just man. He was a righteous man. And righteous, just people don't go out of their way to shame people who have committed a sin. And this was something that he thought she had committed against him. He thought she had committed against him. But he didn't want to embarrass her. And there's no reason for us to try to embarrass somebody who might be faced with the situation of an unplanned pregnancy. So we can follow that example of Joseph. The Bible doesn't tell us a lot about Joseph, and it's often pointed out in sermons that there's not a lot told about Joseph. This says a lot about Joseph, what kind of a man he was, probably why he was chosen to be the father of Jesus, the earthly father of Jesus, that is. Number 2, if you are owed forgiveness for some reason, then give it. If the person knows what they've done is wrong and they want to make things right, forgive it. They have enough going on in their lives without you holding sin over their heads. Holding your hurt and anger over the mother's heart will not encourage her to keep the baby. The opposite, it will encourage her to not have the baby. We have great examples of people who forgave to draw from and remind us of the importance of forgiveness. In Luke chapter 15, we're not going to go there and read the whole story. We're all familiar with the story of the prodigal son. The father had every reason to be mad at his son. But when his son came back, acknowledged his sin, the father's forgiveness was pretty much instant. He was happy that his son had returned and had repented of the sins that he'd done in his life. Another good example is how, and again, we won't go and read the entire example, but in Genesis chapter 33, if you want to look this up, verses 1 through 10, we can see how Esau forgave Jacob. Again, here's a situation where Jacob, with a little help from mom, used kind of deception and trickery and things to steal Esau's birthright from him. Esau had every reason to be angry at his brother for what he had done, but he'd forgiven him. And I find it really interesting that Esau, we can tell from the context, if you go there and read it, Esau had already forgiven Jacob. Jacob didn't go and ask for forgiveness from Esau. When Esau saw Jacob, he had already forgiven him. So forgiveness, if we are actually even owed forgiveness, personally, that is something important to remember. We could also look at just a generation later how Joseph forgave his brothers. Did he test them a little bit first? Yes, he did. He wanted to see if they had changed. But when he saw the change that had transpired in his brothers over the years and the men they were now as compared to the men they were before, he forgave them. So forgiveness is important to remember when trying to help somebody who is in this situation. Third, we need to be a source of encouragement. And this is kind of where it can be tricky. How do you encourage somebody in this situation? How do I, didn't mean to do that. How do I, a 50-year-old man, encourage a 20-year-old woman who is considering having an abortion? It can be tough, but it's not impossible, because there are different types of encouragement that we can give. We can draw from different types of experiences. Remember the main reasons for abortion that are considered. So, can we offer physical support? Maybe this is a situation where the woman needs a place to stay with her newborn child who she's going to keep, hopefully. So can we offer that for her? Can we offer her some financial help as individuals? Can we help support her in that way? There's always some type of support that we can offer. We can be, Tabitha from Joppa. Tabitha, also called Dorcas, who did many good things for people. We can be Cornelius, who gave alms to the poor. He was a very generous person. That's probably the easiest thing for us to do. Because again, it's hard to find the right things to say to somebody who is in that situation. But can we offer emotional support as well? Let's go to Galatians. Galatians chapter 6. We'll read verses 1 through 10. Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such a one, and the Spirit, here's the important part, of meekness, considering thyself, lest thou also be tempted. Bear ye one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. And again, there's many ways that we can help bear somebody's burdens, emotionally, spiritually, physically. For man thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let every man prove his own work, and then shall he have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. For every man shall bear his own burden. Let him that is taught in the word communicate unto him that teacheth in all good things. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that shall he also reap. And we're getting to the end part. It's kind of bookend here. The stuff in the middle is not really the point we're wanting to get to, but it's the bookends of this section. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. A woman in this situation is not an ideal situation. A woman who has an unplanned pregnancy, who feels that she has no hope, who feels that her life is ruined. It's not a great situation, but it is an opportunity for us to do good and to show the love of Christ through our actions. So those are things that we need to consider. Let's also go to 1 Corinthians 13. 1 Corinthians 13, verses 4 through 7. Charity suffereth long and is kind. Charity envieth not. Charity vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeks not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil. Rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth, tongue does not work today, in the truth. Bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. We show somebody in this situation love, and we show them hope. We show them that they are not alone. And kind of the last thing I want to encourage all of us to do, remember I said there's no perfect cookie cutter answer for that, is we need to work on the skills to help people who might face such a situation. And another point I want to make, not just the mother of an unplanned pregnancy, but the father as well. We look at our situation and we fall under those old assumptions that it's the teenage girls we have to worry about. We also have to worry about the teenage boys. All right, a teenage boy is young men might be in a situation where they're the other half of the unplanned pregnancy. And I think we often focus on the female side of it, but we don't focus on the male side of it. How, as men, who some of these teenage boys might look up to, how can we encourage them and help them that things are going to be okay? But we need to work on those skills. This is where I lack. I lack in the skills of what to say to somebody. I really do. There's times when people are in tough situations and I'm at a loss for words. I know there's times I reach out to people and it gets to that point and I really don't know what to say. I had a situation recently where I kind of was very persistent reaching out to somebody who I thought needed to sit down and talk with somebody. And when I sat down with that person and talked to them, I didn't have any magic answers. But you know what? I sat down and talked to them. And I was there for them. And I think that was a positive impact for them. But we need to have those skills. We cannot simply count on having a relationship with a person as the end-all, be-all. And we talk about that a lot, about we need to have relationships with people, but that's the start. That is not the end. We saw this in the story of Job that we're kind of wrapping up. Let's go back to Job. Job chapter 2 and verse 11. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. First, let's point out, they didn't have FMLA. All right. There was a situation where they had to drop everything, and they just had to drop everything. They didn't have time off or things like that. So I point that out because these men cared about Job. All right. And when they lifted up their eyes afar off and knew him not, they lifted up their voice and wept. And they rent every one his mantle and sprinkled dust upon their heads toward heaven. So they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights. I will tell you, there have been times where the person in this world closest to me, my wife, has been in mourning. I did not sit with her 7 days and 7 nights. These people had a relationship with Job. These people cared about Job, but then they messed it all up. All right, they had a relationship. They had the right motives. They wanted to help their friend Job. And that's one of the things that struck me more as going through this class. I've read the story of Job and studied Job many times. As these 3 friends often get a bad rap. They weren't very wise, but they had the best intentions. The lesson for us is having the best intentions is not enough. Let's work on developing the skills that we need to help. And let's be wise enough to where if we don't know what to say, like Job's 3 friends, we keep our mouths shut. Maybe we just go there and just sit with somebody who's going through a struggle. And if we don't know what to say, sometimes it is better just to not say things. That's a lesson I could learn. But the Bible is a great place to learn how to support each other, right? That's when we need to look at the Bible more. We need to study examples in the Bible of how people supported other people. Even people who sometimes, you look at that person and say, maybe they don't deserve my support because of what they've done, and how people still supported those people. Unplanned pregnancies are very scary. I get it. So are planned pregnancies. I know we've had 2 children, and you'd think after the first one, the next one is not as scary. Oh, no. Not for me. It was just as scary. There's so many questions, so many things that you wonder. Am I going to be a good enough parent? Am I going to be able to take care of my child? Those are all questions that we have, whether the pregnancy is planned or unplanned. If one of our brother or sister, one of our family members faces that situation, ask yourself, are you prepared to help them in their time of physical, emotional, and spiritual need? And one of those things that I want to reiterate again, one of the things that we need to do is, as a congregation, I think we need to talk about these things that are tough to talk about more. We need to share experiences. Maybe there's somebody here who has gone through these types of situations, not just the abortion situation, but some of these other social, cultural issues, have been faced with tough decisions, or know somebody who's been faced with tough decisions. If we talk about these things, we can share. We can share wisdom and experience. Finally, in transitioning to the invitation, let us all remember that sin has never done a good job of covering sin. We learn that all too well from David and Bathsheba. David and Bathsheba acted sinfully, both of them, and irresponsibly. And David made things far worse by trying to fix things by himself. He tried to use sin to cover up his sin, his shame. We need to face these things. We can't fix our sins. So as the invitation, I want to remind you, only Jesus can fix our sins, and only Jesus can fix us. He's willing to do it. He's ready to do it, and he wants to do it. And if you have sin in your life this morning that you need not covered, but eliminated, he will eliminate your sins. He will eliminate